Do you want everyone to talk?
Yes. Seconds away here. All right, it is 7 o'clock and we are recording.
Welcome, everybody, to the January 6th, 2022 Corcoran Planning Commission meeting. We will do the roll call. Commissioner Jacobs here, Commissioner Brummond,
Here.
Commissioner Lanterman,
Here.
Commissioner Scholak,
Here.
and Commissioner Vanden 90.
Here.
All right, let the record show that we have full attendance for tonight's meeting. Thank you for joining us, and hope you all had a wonderful holiday. And for those that are joining us, we had a wonderful planning commission education session, and I want to thank our two planners for putting that together for us tonight. So thank you very much. All right, for those that want, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you again. Item 3, approval of tonight's agenda. Looks like we have 2 public hearings and an item C under 6 for staff report and commission recommendation on Tavera 3rd edition. And then our typical reports. Is there any additions or deletions, changes, edits, questions? All right, I'll take a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of approving tonight's agenda, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, agenda is approved. Okay, open forum. Open forum is a time, we have nobody in the audience here physically tonight, but for those of our community that are online, open forum is the time to address the Planning Commission on any item that is not currently on tonight's agenda. Is there anybody with their hand raised?
Yeah,
Natalie?
members of the public on Zoom, if you do want to participate in the open forum, please use the raise your hand function. You should be able to find this under the reactions menu at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes it's also within the participants tab. And at this time, Mr. Chair, no one is raising their hands.
Okay. Well, let's move forward then to item 5, the minutes from December 2nd, 2021 meeting. Does anybody have any points? I know usually we don't find something, but I do have something I just want to question and maybe have my memory refreshed. So, under the public hearing for the zoning amendment for assembly uses, the first paragraph, page 3, when we talked about replacing comparable green infrastructure with comparable curbing in the parking lot, was that really comparable curbing?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission, we went back and forth, and that was the end result. So I could definitely go back and add a bit more detail to that item if you'd like. But that's what we landed on. I think we talked about comparable infrastructure. We talked about a couple different options as to how we could change the wording there.
Well, I know that I brought up the question of what comparable green infrastructure was, and when it came to, curbs and gutter, I use it as an example that you would make it a curb that was surmountable for wildlife.
Yes, yeah, and I could definitely add our discussion about surmountable curbs. I could
Okay,
definitely-
I mean, if that falls under green infrastructure,
Yeah, well, I think it could theoretically fall under green infrastructure, but I can add more detail. I try to simplify things,
Yeah.
but I can add more detail if you'd like. I mean,
well,
I can do that.
as long as it gets up to the city council,
Sure,
that way, or did.
yeah.
That's all that matters. I was just wondering. So if anybody has any other thoughts or comments on it, please let me know, but that's all I had.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I had just a note, I think this was incorrect, it referenced Wu approving the agenda.
Oh, no, where'd
I know, you already
that
forgot
come
about me, but that's
I'm
fine.
sorry. All right, thank you, I will fix
Good
that.
catch.
Number 4, yeah.
Good catch. Okay, any other discussion? Changes?
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure, are you asking for, have we entered council comments on item 6A? I'm sorry. No, I don't think we're there yet, are we? Okay, thank you, sorry.
No.
That's what I thought.
All right, well, if there's no other changes, take a motion to approve the December 2nd, 2021 minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? All right, minutes are approved, thank you. Okay, I take it no one still raised their hand for open forum?
Yeah, no one raised their hand
All right.
for it, Mr. Chair.
We'll officially move on then to item 6. 6A is a public hearing for the topic municipal separate storm sewer systems, otherwise known as Ms4 Ordinance update, and we will entertain the staff report at this time.
Mr. Chair, technically speaking, the agenda has the public comment opportunity for Tavera at this point, since that is not a public hearing. I don't know if you would like, we could move that to Tavera if you'd like.
Okay. Is there anybody out there in the audience who would like to speak to Tavera, third edition, which is item 6C on our agenda?
No one is raising their hand.
All right, if there's no one up there, we will now move on to our public hearing for our staff report for the MS4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next slide. So this is the promised MS4 ordinance update. I do know the acronym as promised. It's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And this is a permit that the city holds, and as such, we have to have a regulatory mechanism to control land disturbance activities of at least 1 acre. The MS4 requirements for municipalities are updated, anticipated to be updated every 5 years by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And then the city is expected to basically immediately carry out updates of city code and policies to align with those requirements. At this time, the biggest thing the city needs to do to bring our city code up to date is to codify our practices in implementing a stormwater pollution prevention program. This is a very, very technical part of our code. This is really not something driven by planning as much as public works. It's more of a function of public works. They're the ones that review these permits and do the enforcement. So consolidation, basically with our proposed changes, we are, as staff, recommending consolidation of all land disturbance requirements currently found in our subdivision ordinance and our zoning ordinance into a single chapter located within Title V, otherwise known as Public Works of the City Code. As part of this change, Section 950 and 1030-060 will be entirely removed except for an introductory explanation paragraph that refers to the new Chapter 54, Land Disturbance and Erosion and Sediment Control of Title V. Additionally, we are adding a similar reference to Chapter 40 in Title 4, which deals with construction regulations, just for consistency to make sure that we are pointing to where this information can be found, where people might otherwise look. Land disturbance permits will be classified into under 1 acre or over 1 acre, which is consistent with our current processes. When the land disturbance is equal to 1 or more acres, a stormwater pollution prevention plan, otherwise called a SWIP, is required as a component of the permit. This is not required when there is less than 1 acres. And the staff report does provide additional exemptions, such as agricultural uses, where this simply would not be allowed, or not needed, as long as they are not causing us to be in violation of our own MS4 permit. Additional changes include amendments to formalize our submittal processes for applications, inspections, financial securities, best management practices, and enforcement procedures. Again, there's nothing really changing. We're just formalizing what we're already doing. So staff recommendation is to move to recommend the following: the draft ordinance amending Section 950, 1030.060, Title 4 and Title 5 of the City Code, and the draft resolution approving findings of fact. And please let me know your questions.
Great, thank you. All right, at this point, we'll open a public hearing. And again, for those that are with us online tonight, Natalie can give you instructions on how to speak on this topic.
Members of the public, just a reminder, if you would like to speak on this topic, please utilize the raise your hand functions found within the reactions tab or possibly your participants tab. Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised at this time.
I think it was mentioned in the staff report that when the city council last discussed this, there were no participants there either.
Mr. Chair, correct. So there is an annual public comment opportunity that is a requirement of our stormwater pollution prevention program. And there was no one that spoke at that. That was just the last December council meeting.
Okay. All right. Well, it would appear to be consistent here then that we can't expect anybody to join us or provide public comment at this point.
Correct. No one's raising their hand.
All right. I have a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is now closed. All right, commission discussion and recommendation. Let me start by saying at first glance, I was anticipating that this was going to be simply we're moving text from one section, moving it to others under a new chapter, made alignment more easy to understand and efficient and for future uses. But boy, I tell you, the more and more I read this, I kind of came to some questions about just exactly how important this is in our process, even though it only touches a little bit of what we do. And so with the permission of the rest of my Commissioners, I'd like to maybe just start out and just getting some of the basic things out that I have questions about. The questions really came to play once I started reading the actual ordinance and found out that there isn't really a word-for-word movement of text from what is currently on the books to what is now new in the ordinance. And I just want to see if there's really any material difference about what can or may happen in the future. So if we move to page 10 of 24 of the ordinance, and specifically then section 54.04, chapter, I'm sorry. The purpose. The purpose of this chapter is to promote, preserve, and enhance the natural resources within the city and protect them from adverse effects occasioned by poorly sited development or incompatible activities by regulating land distribution or disturbing activities that would have an adverse or potentially irreversible impact on water quality and environmentally sensitive land. So let me just state, we have in our recent past dealt with areas that were deemed to be classified as sensitive environmentally, have we not? And yet, I don't recall anything that went through this process that brought up any sort of objection to clearing the trees or, significant changes in grading and things like that. We have seen and heard in the past, I'll note Lennar and Ravinia, some of the objections that people have had with grading, well, let's just call it what this is, land disturbing activities that have resulted in some potentially adverse and irreversible impacts, environmental things, right? Okay. So that is the overall purpose of this. And if I can get your attention now to page 12 of 24 of the ordinance, land disturbing activities. So any disturbance of the land that results in the change of existing soil cover, both vegetative and non-vegetative, creates bare soil, may cause erosion or sedimentation. Such activities include but are not limited to clearing, stripping, grubbing, excavating, filling, grading, logging, storing the materials, and the construction of any structure. A lot of these things we have looked at. There has been lots of concern expressed in public hearings by applicants and residents, this commission, the city council, staff, because this seems to get to the heart of a lot of different issues that we all face with each and every oncoming development. Now, so as I look at this, I want to get to something that I have personally brought up before, and this kind of comes with some of the things that I've seen changes here. So if we go to page 13 of 24, the scope and effect. So we got applicability. Every person prior to commencing any land disturbing activity shall apply and secure a permit from the city. And since most of these are greater than 1 acre, a stormwater pollution prevention plan must be submitted to the issuing authority. And nothing can be issued until that is approved. So that is to the city. correct?
Correct, yeah.
Now, my first question is, in review of that, who does that, because now these are being moved to the Public Works. Is this the duty of our city engineer, or the consultants, or a combination of both? I mean, who has the authority to review all of this? Is that Kevin Mattson?
I'm about to ask him, he's online. So my understanding is it's Public Works, and it is a conversation that's with city engineer, but let's have him confirm, if you can unmute, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a very convoluted permit, but essentially, we require that they meet, whoever's developing the project gets to prepare their plan, and there's certain criteria they have to comply with. It's a plan that evolves over time. It's a plan that covers a wide range of activities. So basically, we review the information. It's done through our engineering team, which is a branch of Public Works. So it could be a combination of myself, Mike Pritchard, and ultimately the engineering field that we have out there that helps us with the developments. They handle more of the engineering team handles more of the developments. We handle more of the city grading permits larger than an acre internal. But really, it's important to understand that each SWIP, we call it Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, is the person who does the work is responsible for the plan. Our requirement under our MS4 permit is that we're monitoring that they're doing their rules as part of the SWIP. So it's really more of an oversight permit. So we want to make sure that they're doing it, that they're complying, that we have something in there if they don't comply, that we can take action and correct it. So it's kind of the MS4 permit overlaps their regular MPDS responsibilities. So it's very convoluted. Does that answer your question, at least in part?
It does, sir, and I appreciate it, because one of the things here is, and I personally, and please don't take this wrong, because as I started to read this and the implications of the application and what the purpose of this is, and I started thinking about who at the city then is going to touch this. And I can see where obviously engineers would need to look at this. Planners need to look at this. And I'm thinking of everybody here that looks at it, but you know who I don't find in the chain of command here, in the decision-making process, is I don't find anybody with an environmental degree or an outlook. And I can't think of any other example, even though these are not on the same planes, but you've got mining companies up in northern Minnesota spending billions of dollars trying to get, mines going, but yet, they throw out, well, yeah, but you didn't do this environmental worksheet, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that. And they'll hold this stuff up for years in courts. And when I look at this and I talk about, and they talk about preserving, the character and again, the natural resources and the water and stuff, but yet we allow so much change to happen to each one of these sites. And when I look back to the site down there across from Lions Park, this was a shoreland overlay district. It was sensitive environmentally for trees. It was sensitive for the water. And yet there were 4 or 5 good solid reasons why that never should have been approved, but yet that's exactly what we did. And I'm wondering if this process maybe is lacking a recommendation to not go forward with these kinds of environmental impacts to the land, because there isn't anybody that's in the review process that looks at this thing from an environmentally impacted statement. I know, Kevin, that you do your job very well. I know staff does their job very well, but I don't see this happening there. Now, when I look, at the scope and effect, so this is the issue that I got thinking of, when you read then on page 14 of 24, now this would be under subdivision 2, the exceptions for the applicability of this. Okay, so you got subdivision 2, A, B, C, and then we get to D. The tilling, planting, and harvesting of agricultural, horticultural, or silvicultural, I've never heard that term, but forestry crops or other agricultural production operations. Now, I took notice to this because if you look on page 6 of 24, the current language of our ordinance under subdivision 6, item D, allows an exemption for routine agricultural crop management practices. Now, we have, of course, experienced in this city now over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years, we've seen landowners tear down entire strands and, tree stands, tree lines, wooded stands of forest. They've torn them all out and plowed them under. And this has been done, I assume, to increase the number of tillable acreage. But my question is did they need an application to do this? Or does none of that apply because there is no application that's been applied for in developing? The cause and effect of all this is that as we move forward with greater and greater developments, will we see increased activity before application processes to go through this process where it might be deemed that you cannot tear down these trees because it would be disturbing the land that would not be beneficial and in violation of this application process. So it's better to just tear it all down now before you make the application. And I think we've seen that happen. Because now, if you go and look at, again, now the new language in D, again, at the top of page 14, it says here harvesting forestry crops. And so this exemption is a little bit more, it has a few more descriptive uses or activities than what we had before. And so I'm curious to know what does this apply to any landowner, whether they are developing their land or not? Do they have the right to just go start tearing out significant stands of trees over an acre without having to make an application for this ordinance?
Mr. Chair, so this was meant to clarify what we meant by agricultural crop productions in the previous section that we are now deleting. So again, it was an attempt to clarify. My understanding, and Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, is correct. If it's in conjunction with agricultural production, as a city, we've identified this as a character that we want to keep. We value agricultural uses, so we want to give them an exemption from this process. But again, Kevin, feel free to add anything to that.
Well, no, I think in general it was to carry forward our existing policies. There's no intent to change our policy. It's intent to clarify what would be covered or what not covered. So generally speaking, to some of your hypotheticals, there's a couple questions in there, but generally speaking, if it's tree removal related to generating more tillable areas, that would not fall under this permit as our past practice.
Wait, it would not follow as an allowable exemption?
It would be an exemption. It would not trigger a grading permit or a land disturbance permit because it's exempted. And that's consistent with how we've applied that before this change. This change is really just intended to simplify and consolidate the code. And there's nothing in here that would change the interpretation on that. So that would be, to be clear, we didn't interpret that as an MS4 permit requirement before. We're not going to do that after council makes a decision on this. We're essentially just putting down our policy on paper and trying to clarify that existing policy. Does that make sense?
You know, Kevin, the way I interpret it, it sounds absolutely opposite of what I was trying to point out. The old one basically said nothing about trees. It just said, you know, you're exempt if you're doing something with your ag land. If you're doing ag land management or ag land activities. And then farmers started cutting out all their trees. And now I see this new enhanced language, and I see it as a listed exemption. And so when we talk about what, I mean, if I heard you right, or if I heard staff right, if we're saying that this is supposed to be in hopes of preserving trees, then we basically have given every farmer the right to cut down every tree as much as they want, because it's an exempt, it's exempt from requiring a land disturbance application. Would that not be correct?
I don't know if I misspoke. I was not saying that we're intending to put in writing what our practice has been and policy has been previous to this. So we can certainly leave the language vague, if that makes you guys more comfortable, but we're not trying to make any changes to our policy with this process.
Okay.
We're trying to clarify to people information so that they can better understand our policy. So if there's language tweaks that have to be made to D that you guys have for recommendations to council to consider, we can digest that, try to make that clear when it goes forward to council. That's certainly something we can get into. But our intent was not to change policy with this. It was to put down in writing what our policy has been.
Okay.
In a more clear way. So
okay.
That's certainly something we can look at, but I was not trying to say we would do something different today. My example was if there's a scenario where there was a landowner that chose to remove trees and converted them to tillable area, we would treat that in 2021 as we would in 2022. That's our intent with this document.
So again, my basic question is that removing trees from agricultural land existing today is completely permissible without any land disturbance application.
Correct. That's how we've been operating today, and that's what we're trying to put to clarify with this new revision. Correct.
Okay. All right. I understand. It was the policy of the past, and it's just clarifying that it is allowable without any oversight going on in the future.
Mr. Chair, I would add, but we do have the ability to terminate this exemption if it is found to threaten or impede our ability to meet our own permit requirements. So we do, the very next clause, we do have a caveat that allows us for enforcement if it is causing a serious problem.
I don't, good luck with that one, I guess. Now, under subdivision 5, again, now this is on page 15 of 24, is the SWPPP. So there is area A, B, C, and D. Now, these applications, are these generally filed or applied for before a public hearing on a development at the City Planning Commission?
These applications, Mr. Chair, these applications would be for something that isn't filed with the city. If there's a different regulatory process, such as a plat that they're going through, then we're looking at this through the plat process. Again, Kevin, please correct me if I'm wrong. That is my understanding. So this would be for basically someone looking to build on a property that doesn't need to go through a subdivision, and it's going to impact over 1 acre. They would have to submit all of this information. And then for our plats, we basically have all of this information outlined as well as required. So that's just a different land use process, basically.
Okay, so let me be clear in my understanding then. So a Lennar or M&I properties, they are never going to go through this process.
They still go through the SWIP process, right, Kevin?
They go through essentially the same process through the entire development review. So they have it's basically their grading plan. The watershed review basically requires a SWIP, so there's a lot of overlap in the review agencies. Any land disturbance more than an acre basically goes through these same requirements. They might take a little bit different format, but essentially they're all bound to the same rules and regulations. And again, the SWIP is intended to be site-specific, so your SWIP might look different for each site depending on where you are, what you're doing, et cetera. So it's intended to be written so it can be, site-specific.
Mr. Chair, for example, Tavera, which we're reviewing, and a couple items here, a specific condition in the engineer's report is that they need to submit a SWIP. So there's a little bit of overlap, but this is specifically for things that aren't necessarily going through a process that we are already looking at from a planning commission and city council standpoint.
Okay. Because what interests me is, I don't ever recall having seen any application relative to this, even though we talk a lot about some of these impacts that this is supposed to evaluate. If you take just subdivision 5, there's 43 particular, very specific pieces of information that are supposed to be investigated and disclosed, and I guess I just wonder, is that really happening? I mean,
Natalie, could I just
Yes,
make
go
a
right
comment?
ahead.
For Tavera, for example, we do get a SWIP. It's about a 100-page document. We don't include it in your packet.
Okay.
It's a very technical document, but we do include that. And that's true for all of our subdivisions. So just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean that Kevin and the Stantec engineering team aren't reviewing it. And we usually have a condition in there about modifications to that SWIP when you dig into the engineering memo. So it is I would just say for the record, you can always come look at it. It's just such a big technical document that we don't give it to you in your packet. But it is
Okay.
available for any project that disturbs an acre or more.
okay, well, that's good to know. So, I guess this is really maybe a dumb question then. So out of all of the recent, in the last 6 years, the developments that have come through and all this and that, has there ever been an actual denial of anything based upon a SWIP application? I mean, has anyone ever said, yeah, you know what, you can't grade that, or you can't remove that, you can't lower this elevation, you can't, because you know what, it's just going to be bad for the environment, it's going to be bad for water channeling. Has there ever been a denial for anything?
Kevin?
I don't know if denial is the right word. It's a working document, so if they were to submit a SWIP that wasn't satisfactory, they would receive comments back that say this needs to be addressed, or Y needs to be addressed, or you don't have a condition in there for a temporary stockpile, or you missed that there's a impaired stream a mile away and that triggers different rules. So the project wouldn't move forward without it at least initially meeting that. So, the answer is probably, as long as, I would say the answer is not, never been denied, but it's been sent back until it's acceptable. And the watershed would require that, we would require that. And again, if there is a field problem, part of the SWIP is that you have to adjust on the fly, you have to amend your plan. If your proposed plan does not work, if it's not satisfactory, you have to do a different plan to bring it into compliance. And there's responsibilities and documentation of multiple agencies. There's multiple permits up and down an organization, like for instance Lennar, through all their subcontractors and builders. So there is a ton of paperwork, and so like I said, it's a living document. It's not a one and done. It's intended to be a living document. So a lot of oversight from the city. So our role is again really primarily oversight, right? There's a trained professional that puts these together. We have trained professionals that review them, but it is the owner that takes on the primary responsibility to make sure their site's correct and in compliance. If they're out of compliance and routinely out of compliance and ignorant out of compliance, then we come in and our role is then to make sure we can do something about it.
Okay, great. Last question, and again, because I find some of this stuff to be quite an administrative function and maintenance. And so you get to 54.10, which is page 19 of 24, and it continues on to page 20 of 24. So when you talk about routine inspections, and they talk about, well, if it rains, once every 7 days or more than a quarter inch or something to that effect, and you have to send somebody out there and they have to, write up an entire inspection report and look for this and that. My only question, do these actually take place? Do we have enough?
Yes, they do, and they have to be preserved on site. And I would say there's probably 3 or 4 reports for every event from multiple agencies. So in the instance of Tavera, Lennar has a representative that goes around and does it. We have the developer through an escrow basically have our engineering team go around and do that. Even if it doesn't rain, we still do it once a week. We do it once a month in the wintertime, even when everything's frozen. So we have a whole laundry list of policies and actions that we do, and it's really just a huge documentation train. That's what the MPCA wants. Its intent is to make sure we're monitoring it, and it is significant, and it's expensive for a good reason. But yes, these do all happen.
Okay, all right. Well, I take a lot of comfort in hearing that, then, because I would have thought for sure that, maybe this is why we had some of the problems early on that we had with, Ravinia, is that, we had these big rainouts, and yet nothing, nobody seemed to really have an answer, or maybe my memory's just gone, but I do appreciate it. And again, I wasn't trying to break all this down. I was just trying to understand that, are we really looking at this thing from more or less an environmental position instead of just an engineering and technical, wastewater management or drainage issue. So I appreciate it all. Thank you. Anybody else, please? Go ahead.
Thank you. This proposal, in my view, streamlines the code. It consolidates the subject matter to one section, Section 54. I like this. I'm all about consolidation. In substance, however, the proposal regulates landowners who disturb land to an extent set by the new ordinance. Basically, only those over 1 acre must get the stormwater plan, but all parcels, including those under 1 acre, also must pull a land disturbance permit. Now, there are 9 exceptions, and most of these exceptions relate to building permits that are approved, et cetera. But I'd like to focus on one, and the one that I'd like to focus on reads, quote, "Any land disturbance or land filling activities relating to general yard maintenance or landscaping when the volume of soil or earth impacts amounts to 50 cubic yards or less, and there is no potential the activities will impact drainage. So, that basically means that no one can disturb their property, dig a ditch if they feel like it, or create a garden bed if it involves anything more than what can fit in a big dumpster, 50 cubic yards. Now, notably, Natalie, your report states that, quote, "These exemptions are consistent with what is currently listed in section 1030.060 sub 6. Respectfully, I don't think that's correct. As currently written, the exception is for any land disturbance over 301 cubic yards, not 50 cubic yards. That is quite a bigger exemption than the one now being proposed. So my first question on this, I will ask, why is there such a difference being proposed now? Now, 50 cubic yards may sound like a lot, but people with property could easily meet that. In fact, that's who's going to be affected most by this. Smaller yards, I'm thinking in like new developments, are subject to a homeowners association, which has its own covenants related to changing drainage. Plus, clearing counts in the definition of a land disturbance. So I would ask Natalie to clarify that the exemption would not include trees and brush removal, and that it is limited to moving actual earth. Just remember, here homeowners will have to pull a permit if they want to remove more than a dumpster full of earth. Not only would they have to pay for the permit, but they would also have to prepare an incredibly detailed application detailing exactly what a landowner proposes to do. Now, with our current definition of land disturbing activity, it seems like removing some trees requires pulling a permit. I think that the removal of some trees and brush should not require pulling a permit and should be added to the list of exemptions. Now, I also just want to say, make no mistake that I am very unhappy that this is 23 pages of new code language being proposed. And Natalie, just a few minutes ago, you stated that these code changes are, quote, very, very technical. I agree. Each sentence carries significance, and it was made available to commissioners with 1 week to review. I would again politely ask for more time when there are 23 pages that require reading as carefully as a city code amendment. On that, I would ask staff if the language that's added here, was this borrowed from some other municipality, or was this original work? So the bottom line for me is I would suggest that the city consider removing the word clearing from the definition of land disturbance, or add something about the removal of trees and vegetation to the list of exemptions. You know, without these changes, I know how I'll vote. So, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Could I get an answer on the 301 versus 50, please?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lanterman, so my discussions with Public Works was that 300 cubic yards is actually several truckloads. And so we were minimizing it down to 50 yards. And again, Kevin, if you can speak to why we're making this change.
Yeah, I think it just comes if we were to, our grading permit delineates it at 50 yards. So again, this is something that we've been in practice doing, and I think we try to just translate it into this consolidation. So if you were to call the city, or someone was going to file a complaint with the city against seeing some activity, land disturbance activity, there's a threshold in our grading permit,
Yeah.
and essentially that 50 cubic yards was that threshold, the minimum threshold where we would require information. So I think it was a consolidation of bringing some of those existing policies into code.
Well, I guess my concern is when it's represented by staff that these exemptions are consistent with what is currently listed in section 1030.060 subdivision 6. When that representation is made to that commission, I assume it's true, but it's not true. It's 301 cubic yards. It's not 50 yards. So I would also ask, in the future, if we can just be given accurate representations when it comes to what our ordinances say. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners want the floor? Any questions?
Sorry, I did have a question. This is more just learning for me, so.
Sure.
I noticed that just under the background, you guys said it's, this gets done every 5 years, and then we're supposed to comply within 12 months. And so it's past that. Is there a problem with, is there any penalties that occur? Because it looks like it was November of 2020.
I believe theoretically they can do something to our permit, but there's nothing happening at this point,
Okay.
and we are working on it, so that's the goal, and I think that we kind of got tagged saying, hey, you need to get this done.
Okay.
And so we are doing it.
So then we submit something showing we're in compliance?
I believe so. Kevin, how does that get handled?
Yeah, and just to add a little more context to that, so we had to submit our proposed MS4 permit in November of 2022. I think it took a full year for them to accept the permit. If I have my dates right, I think it was like September of 2021 when the clock actually started, and that's when we started this process. So we're still within the 12-month clock. But yes, if we didn't do it, if we ignored their requirements, then we would potentially face fines, and they would come talk to us, and they would basically work with us to make sure that was in place. So we're still good within the window.
And then I guess, so regarding the 301 versus 50, and I think it's talking here about moving. I'm just trying to think about a garden. Would that be technically considered, if somebody's gonna, if I have 10 acres, I wanna put a garden in, I could very quickly get to 50 cubic yards, disturbing I probably did that already. I'm just trying to think about that. Like, that seems maybe a little small. Not if you're not if you're on a third acre, quarter acre, but if you're on a larger lake, putting in a 100 by 20 foot, going down a little bit, wouldn't take long to get to way over 50.
Kevin, Mike had an estimate when I spoke with him about how many trucks it would take to fill 300 cubic yards versus 50. Do you know that number?
I'm more talking about tilling though, like disturbing, if you will.
Sure.
I'm not actually hauling in anything, going to actually be moving anything, I'm
If you called in and you're building a garden and there was a buffer of grass around it, that wouldn't even be viewed as a disturbance because it's protected, and so that wouldn't trigger a permit. Like a standard dump truck that you see driving down the road, it depends on what material you put in it, but that's approximately 12 to 15 cubic yards. So 50 cubic yards was if your neighbor showed up with 4 to 5, dump trucks and dumped them in your front yard. That would be approximately, in our type of clay soils, that would be about 4 trucks.
Creates bare soil.
Yeah, we're just trying, you said if it's surrounded by grass, such as a garden, then it's okay. I guess I wasn't clear where that's at in the language.
Well, that's that, there's a lot of interpretation in these. These are complex documents, right? So if someone were to call in this is how it plays out in practice. If a resident calls in and says, here's what I want to do, here's what I do on my property, am I subject to any permits? Well, we would we would basically ask them a series of questions to get a better understanding of their site. If they describe that they're building a 50 by 50 garden in the center of their lot, we'd pull up Hennepin County and we'd say that's not going to qualify for a grading permit. If we get a call where a neighbor is saying there is trucks coming in every hour and dumping in this property, well, that's going to trigger a permit, right? So that's a scenario of how this would play out when we have a question whether the permit applies. Quite frankly, some people never call in, and we have to deal with it on the fly, or some people will call ahead and ask, and we make those interpretations on does it meet these rules or not.
I would ask my colleague if I can comment. Do you mind? Thank you. The way that the language reads, though, the land disturbing activity, the way the language reads is it reads, any disturbance to the land that results in a change to the existing soil cover, both vegetative and non-vegetative, creates bare soil, like in the example my colleague gave of just tilling, creates bare soil, alters hydrology, or may cause erosion or sediment. Such activities include, but are not limited to, clearing, stripping, grubbing, excavating, filling, grading, logging, storage of materials, and the construction of any structure. So I think the way I read this is, the example given, well, what if I'm just tilling? I think that falls under this language, which is troubling to me, so.
Yeah, but and then if you look at the exception, maybe at 300 yards, it would be fine, cubic yards would be fine, but not at 50.
But not at 50.
Tilling in particular.
And I can tell you, we're talking about, well, how much is that? I just had a dumpster at my house, it was 50 cubic yards, okay? So we're looking, and it's a big dumpster, but it's a dumpster. 300 is just 6 of those. It's not, 10 dump trucks worth of dirt or something like that, so, thank you.
Kevin, a question for you. In the context of then, say, a landowner taking a backhoe and clearing out a drainage ditch, and then putting that material onto the farm field to be spread out later, would that default to a permit required under this ordinance, or would that be an issue that would be, just by default, not handled by the city, but by the watershed district?
It really depends on where it is, what type of stream, who has jurisdiction over the stream. It could be multiple people wanting to at least be aware of it. I would probably need a little more detail on that, but if we had someone call in, someone digging in the ditch, we would certainly go out and make sure that was appropriate and covered. And if they didn't have a permit, there would be something in place, a corrective action, something like that, where they might have to go back and do a permit. Most of the time, that type of thing would fall under a maintenance category, and if it was a wetland drainage swale, for instance, there's a lot of those in Corcoran, you are allowed to maintain a wetland drainage swale. So again, these rules, there's lots of interpretation, lots of jurisdiction over it. So this is really what we use under an MS4 permit to evaluate that. But I can't, it's really hard for me to hypothesize that. But, in the context of we see dirt moving near a waterway or wetland, yes, we would certainly react to that. And if there was something in their MS4 obligations that required that, we would then require them to do that, go through our enforcement procedures to get it corrected, contact other agencies if they had the primary jurisdiction. A lot of times there's a primary jurisdiction in other jurisdictions. So, that's the technical complicated part of this MS4 permit. It's a handful for sure.
Okay. To our staff, so relative to applications under this ordinance for properties or disturbance areas under 1 acre, can there be a application devised that would not be so burdensome to a single residential owner if it's going to involve more than 50 yards? I mean, again, there's 43 items.
Mr. Chair, again, I'd have to defer to Kevin because they're the ones that would facilitate this. And they're the ones that were trying to make this change to match up with our grading permits. And I apologize for my misuse of consistency with what was documented in code, but I do know that all of this is consistent with what we are currently doing.
I mean, we're subject per the by the MPCA to focus on stuff primarily more than 1 acre. The stuff under 1 acre is what we've done for past practice. We don't require 43 answered questions for something under 1 acre. We, again, meet with the residents. We use these as guidelines when we assess the site and tell them what additional information we need. And that's primarily, the tool we use for that is the grading permit. That's not included in here, but we have a grading permit that basically takes what we commonly see, requires that information down, and then we're always subject to additional requests. So if we have a complicated site, we'll work with them. We'll tell them they need a watershed permit. We'll tell them they're over 1 acre. We'll tell them we need survey data versus LiDAR contours, which is just, GIS stuff from the satellite. So it's really the grading permit that a resident would see. That grading permit's dictated off of this.
Yeah.
So it's like a simplified version of this, but it still follows all the same guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Any other discussion, questions, or comments from staff or from the planning commission?
Nope.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
can I ask a clarification question, please?
absolutely.
So Kevin, in the discussion on the garden scenario, as I read D for exemptions, or we're exempting tilling, planting, or harvesting, is that the rationale for, say, a 5 acre garden being planted, why that would not require this process?
Kevin? Oh,
Sorry, but I apologize, I was on mute. I think that's the intention. I can work with Mike on trying to bring that back and describe that a little better and bring back the garden component that we heard today. That's certainly that would certainly in my mind fall under that exemption, something of that category. So I think that's a good point, and we can certainly work on having better language there that maybe folks are more comfortable with, because that would, under our current policy, that would not be something that we would view as a high focus area for land disturbance,
Okay, very good, thank you. It does read a little bit like it's an industrial agricultural implementation under D. So your suggestion of making it a little bit more broad might be helpful. Good thought.
So what you're asking then is, if you're a residential homeowner and you're going to build a sizable garden, and of course, a lot of gardens I see now are in boxes. They're elevated, they're not in the ground anymore. So if you're going to build a bunch of large boxes, you could easily bring in over 50 cubic yards to fill those boxes, but you didn't change the necessary the elevation or the contour of the land. And there's nothing in there that says you have to do something special because you put boxes there, unless you put it under construction. But you're saying that maybe we could get a homestead exemption for the gardens under item D.
I wasn't envisioning raised beds, but that's a good point. Maybe that's something we need to consider further. I was just envisioning if you've got a a larger lot and maybe you want to start growing a bunch of vegetables.
Yeah.
We probably don't want to regulate that in the same way we do these other applications.
Yeah. I mean, I have a personal friend, they're in Greenfield, but that's what they did. Their whole garden is in boxes, elevated, kind of because of the contour of the land, it's on a downhill, but they prefer it that way.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Anything else? All right. All right, so we have an ordinance to recommend approval or denial. An ordinance amending the text of section 950, and then we have a findings of fact. So we have two items to take a vote on here tonight. Does anybody wish to make any changes or suggestions to the text that is printed within the proposed ordinances?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this. Tonight, we've heard this called a very complicated document, a very convoluted document, and a very, very technical document. And I don't think that this council has had enough time to digest everything that's in here, especially even if it was just an innocent oversight. You know, we have inconsistent information. So I, for one, I would prefer to have more time to review this in greater detail. I would like to make a motion to postpone the vote on this.
Okay. Is there, question then, there is no time limit on this because this is a ordinance update on our own action?
Correct, the time, Mr. Chair, the time limit would be just within compliance for our permit. I guess I would need further direction as to what information is missing, so I can get that for you, and if that is something that the commission would like to do. I
Okay,
think part of the time constraint, we were trying to get this in place so that it was ready to go for spring construction, and so that we had this in place prior to construction beginning as soon as March. So I think
Okay.
that was part of the goal, is trying to getting it done in January.
for spring construction.
Correct, the construction season, just generally, because that'll be when this is useful.
And do you think passing this will have a significant impact on that process?
I think it'll provide clarity within our processes that we currently have within the city. And then it would satisfy other requirements that we're trying to satisfy with the state. But
Okay,
it is ultimately your commission's decision.
yeah. As far as your comment about requesting additional, what information you could provide, I assume Commissioner Lanterman probably wouldn't be able to answer that any better than I would, maybe, in that maybe we don't know what information or clarity we would seek, right? Or,
Well, I
I
guess.
mean, maybe you can be more specific to that as to what you would like to see if we were to continue this.
Well, in my opinion, I think that this commission has raised some valid points, and I would, first of all, I would like just additional time. I'm not looking for additional information. I'm looking for additional time to digest this very, very complicated document that we've had 7 days or less to review. And this document has consequences. Words have meanings, and our code should mean something. And we shouldn't be expected to digest this in a 7-day period. So I, for one, I have concerns about the ordinance as it's written. At the very least, I would like to see those concerns addressed with some different language. But I would also like some additional time. I have a day job. I can't take 24 hours a day to review this. But again, it's a complicated document. There have been inconsistent statements, and I think that warrants a closer examination.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner Landerman, I would add, I would need direction from the commission as to what exactly we are in agreement that the language needs to be changed to. I think that we have a clear direction with the gardening exemption, but I don't know if we're necessarily in agreement as a commission as to what other language we're looking to change.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we need to address the discrepancy between 50 and 301. I don't think that 50 cubic yards is reasonable, in my opinion. So I'm concerned about that. As I said, I think that the city, at the very least, needs to remove the word clearing from the definition of land disturbance. I mean, if I'm clearing out some dead brush, I can pretty easily fill up a dumpster. I can pretty easily fill up that 50 dumpster. So at the very least, I think we should revisit 50 versus 301, but let's say we go with 50. If we go with 50, then I think at a minimum, we have to remove the word clearing from the definition, or add something, actively add language about the removal of trees and vegetation and brush to that list of exemptions. If we make those changes, I would be fine with this, with the understanding that in the future, I'd really like more than 7 days to review 23 pages of code changes.
Commissioner Landerman, that typically is not the practice, just because we are, is that something that we usually do with code changes, is get it out more than a week? Because, most cities,
We did it just a few months ago.
that was not typical practice. We
Okay.
did postpone it so that we could give you more time, and I had clear direction as to what it is that you wanted to change, and it was a full agreement of the commission. And we can do that here. I'm just saying that typically, as staff, we are processing so many applications, we can't get a packet out 2 weeks in advance.
But how long did it take you to write these code edits?
This has been.
Was this
a process
copy and?
No, this has been an ongoing process with Stan Tech, in consultation with Stan Tech and Public Works since
Right.
October. This has
Right.
been a very
And we
long
have 7 days to review it, and you called it very, very technical, and it is. Okay? This should not be ready, shoot, aim. Okay? It is more important that we get this done right than to get it done fast.
Fair enough. I think at this point, we have a motion to table, and I have a direction as to what we would be looking for if we tabled it, if there's anything we want to add to that, and we need a second.
Well, I'd like to add, I guess, the agricultural exemptions, maybe some more definition, and maybe more limited scope on being able to just disturb ground of areas that clearly are adjacent to and part of wetlands by tearing down acres and acres of trees. So if this is something that we are putting together, if it's a common practice, we didn't do it before, but maybe we should. Right? I mean, what else do we have to do here, other than maybe talk about things that we should be doing, instead of just letting them happen without any further forethought?
Mr. Chair, I do think there is concern about making tree removal or tree preservation as a requirement of the SWIP, though.
Okay, I'm not calling this tree preservation,
I know, but you're saying. we
but
don't
we're
want
talking about
tree
land
removal.
disturbance.
But we're talking about ground land disturbance, and so while trees are definitely something that we are looking at, I don't think we can make it a requirement that people can't remove trees in, especially in consultation with agriculture when they have exemptions, as part of this process. I think that is something that we would need to handle elsewhere if we're going to do that. We're talking about basically a tree preservation ordinance. I know that's not the words we want to use, but that is basically what we would, I think, would be the result of trying to do what you are asking.
Does the state exempt this at the state level?
We are allowed to have this exemption. Kevin?
We're allowed, but is it required? Does the state force the city or the county to allow tree removal and disturbance to the ground without any permit or review for the, ecological consequences that it may bring forth?
I think that may be a question for more, Kevin, if, I'm trying to wrap my head around the question myself. My understanding, and I've lost my train of thought, I apologize, but my understanding is it is a city policy and has been that we exempt agricultural activity from several requirements because it is a value that we have as a city. So we're talking about changing basically a city, what is the word? A city practice and policy, which I think is a larger discussion that is outside of this because there are other areas where agricultural is given additional abilities. And we don't necessarily know where wetlands are on agricultural land. When something hasn't gone through the platting process, we don't have those wetlands delineated. So it's again, there's just several exemptions already provided to agricultural elsewhere that I don't know if we can address solely as part of the SWIP. And Kevin, if you have anything to add, please do.
Chair, not really anything to add. It again, it's just the whole exercise that we're required by the MS4 is to essentially, we had these policies over the, say, the last two permit cycles, and the example was, we recommend that you put it into code. We recommend they put into code. This permit cycle, our processes that they were okay with now have to be, it's a requirement to put them into ordinance. So the process we've undertaken, this is just simply to transfer our existing practices and all our permits and policies and put them into code. So our intent was just to put on paper what we've been doing for the last almost decade plus. I don't know all the specifics to your question, but I would say that we're in compliance if our existing practices are in compliance. The only thing that wasn't in compliance is we didn't have them in our actual code. Does that make sense? So.
And you know, Kevin, again, as I stated, when I first picked this packet up, I immediately first pegged it as nothing more than, it was nothing more than an administrative procedure. And I think it was handled that way, but the more and more I read it, the more and more I became concerned about the process, the purpose, the intent, and its application. And this has a lot of potential application, I think, to change what happens on the land and its use and its development in the future. And I think it would be a mistake for us not to look at the specifics of each and every line, or I won't go that far, but at least look at this stuff and bring up issues that maybe we think could be changed. Is that not our function?
That would be your purview, but yes, you're just to explain Corcoran's past practice with stormwater regulations, it's been a compliance-based practice. So that's what this document is really, it carries forward all of our practices in a compliance-based fashion. So if the city council, if you guys made a recommendation to go above and beyond in some capacity, yeah, that would be a different conversation. I think that's what you're alluding to. I don't mean to take that. What I'm hearing is you're alluding to, should we be talking about maybe more than compliance-based? That's really a different question than this. This is, the intent of this is really to put down on paper what we've been doing. So I'm just trying to repeat what I heard, and so maybe if I'm mistaken, you can tell me. But again, if that's the intent to have that conversation, I would lean on planning to say when it's appropriate, or maybe a council when it's appropriate to have those conversations. But that's, our intent was to maintain a compliance-based approach.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
respectfully, I have a motion on the floor, and I would like a vote.
We need a second first.
All right, the motion is to table this to a future date. Is that date need to be determined now?
I think we need a second on my motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we need to have a date to how we table this? Or do we just table it and then the date comes after the vote?
By next month.
I think you could do it either way. I personally don't know what date would be sufficient, because I don't know if I'm going to be here for the next planning commission meeting. So I don't know, we might have to tap in someone else.
Okay.
When we do next planning commission meeting.
All right, we'll figure that out. All right, so we have a motion and a second to table this. Any further discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. This is tabled to a future date, 5-0. All right, thank you. Well, that certainly was a much longer and bigger topic than even I anticipated it to be, given all of my speaking, so I appreciate it, and we'll get through it, as we always do. Okay, item 6B, public hearing, urban conservation ordinance update. And we'll have entertained the staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted in the staff report, this was identified as a 2021 priority by the City Council. And the goal was to preserve open space in the MUSA, the Metropolitan Urban Service Area. So we've been working on this for almost a year, kicking off with a March council work session. We had a follow-up session in April. Then we had the joint session with the Planning Commission. Some of you were there, Council and Planning Commission joint session, to discuss the ordinance framework. And then we held a roundtable, developer roundtable with the council in August to get feedback from the development community about the draft ordinance, and then brought that back to the council in November. They made some edits, as were outlined in the staff report, and directed staff to schedule a public hearing at the Planning Commission. So this is a result of about 9 months of work, primarily with the council, but of course with the Planning Commission early in the process as well. The discussion started with trying to identify the priority. Is it preserving open natural resources or open space? And this map was used to identify a layer on our natural resource inventory over our zoning map. Ultimately, it was decided that it was really the open space in and of itself that was important. And so some of the background, and I know some of you have seen this at that meeting, but since we have new commissioners, I wanted to provide a little more context. This image, which was in your packet, is a fake example of a 40-acre parcel in Corcoran, but because it's Corcoran, it was important to put wetlands in there. And the purpose of the exercise was to see, on a typical Corcoran parcel of 40 acres, can you actually do a development under the existing R2 zoning district? And in this theoretical parcel, it is. And I think it's important to say, I don't believe it's true on every parcel, but it is theoretically possible to meet the zoning standards for the RSF2 district as they exist today. We sometimes hear that you can't meet that, and I think while that may sometimes be true, we can show here that it is possible. And the idea is that maybe this isn't the best type of development. And so we wanted to find a way to preserve some open space. This draft, as the result of the last 10 months or so of work, allows an urban conservation subdivision as an option in the low-density residential land use areas. So in your packet, and shown here in the upper right, is our land use map. The low-density residential land use is the bright yellow. And that is the bulk of the land use in the MUSA. The majority of the land that we're going to develop in the MUSA is intended to be at low-density residential. Under our comprehensive plan, that means development needs to occur at 3 to 5 units an acre, net acre. So this option is a potential development route for folks in that low-density residential. The zoning that corresponds with that land use is RSF2 and RSF3. Those are the two zoning districts that correspond with that. Under the draft ordinance, those zoning districts would be allowed single and two-family homes by right, without a conditional use permit. That's an allowed use, as Natalie talked about earlier tonight. The urban conservation subdivision has no minimum lot width or lot size. It has setbacks similar to what we've been seeing in some of the PUDs. It has a 20-foot front and rear yard setback and a 5-foot side yard setback. But we do require a larger setback around the perimeter of the project. So anytime the development area abuts an existing parcel, that has a 30-foot setback. That's the same rear yard setback as exists in the RSF2 district today for single-family homes. The ordinance, by the nature of the fact that we're condensing lots into a smaller area, the lots are going to get narrower, and so we are waiving with this the garage frontage requirement. The commissioners who've been here for a while will remember we have a 55% max building face as a garage. So we limit the face of the garage on new residential structures. In exchange for that flexibility that developers you've heard ask for a lot, we would require 25% of the gross land area to be preserved. That 25%, though, has to be upland area. It can't be wetland. It has to be upland area. So the 40-acre parcel, I have a couple of examples I'll show you, but the part that's being preserved has to be at least that meeting it with upland area. It can be more, you know, a wetland could be included in it, but the 25% has to be upland. And that open space has to be no more than 2 non-contiguous parcels. We don't want little dribs and drabs of land. We want it to be a meaningful chunk of land that looks like open space. It can be separated by a street because that will function, we think, as open space still, but otherwise needs to be contiguous. And it needs to be in a conservation easement. The conservation easement in the urban area, this can be permanent. Because the density has to meet our land use criteria at development, this would not have to develop in the future to be in compliance with our land use goals. That's different from the rural cluster subdivisions, which have temporary conservation easements with the idea that in some Star Wars years, sewer and water will come out to rural Corcoran and it could be subdivided again. For these types of developments, we talked about a number of different minimum development sizes with the council and ultimately settled on a minimum of 20 acres to be eligible for this type of a subdivision. We felt like 40 might carve out some parcels that would still be viable, and anything less than that really wouldn't preserve meaningful open space. We also had a fair amount of discussion with the council, also with the developers, about whether park space, open space could be used to meet park dedication. And the draft would allow that at the council's discretion. We could use the open space as parkland credit if the comprehensive plan identified it or the council felt like the needs of the development required that parkland. So as an example, with 25% open space and clustering the required number of lots on a 40-acre parcel, this shows 73 lots and gets us at 3.5 units per net acre. The comprehensive plan, again, requires 3 to 5. So this is sort of at that low end of what we're required to provide. And I want to be clear that this is certainly not a development proposal. It's my team. We're looking at it, so it's, again, not a real piece of property, and it's our best guess at stormwater, for example. But you can see that the open space area in this exhibit does include some wetlands, but the 25%, or 10 acres, is the green area. So only that counts to meet on a 40-acre parcel. 10 acres would need to be preserved as open space, and it has to be upland. So that's what this exhibit is showing. Only the green is being counted towards that open space, but that wetland would be under that same outlot and part of that same conservation easement. This is a similar example where we're double loading the street so that in this example, we wanted the streets to abut the open space, making it more visible. This example had lots backing up to that open space. This exhibit was done earlier in the process. The code does require breaks in that open space, corridors 50 feet wide, so that people can access that open space. It's not just a private amenity for the people on the west side of the road. But again, the open space is based on just the green area, even though wetland would be in there. There is a lot of detail in the ordinance. We've worked hard with the council. This does reflect the last conversation with them and the edits that they requested, and so we do recommend that you open the public hearing, take any public testimony, and then move to recommend approval of the ordinance and the resolution with findings of fact. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Kendra. All right, at this point, we'll open up the meeting for the public hearing. Again, those that are attending online, Natalie will give you instructions on how to get hooked up to present your opinions and views to the Planning Commission.
Members of the public, if you'd like to participate in the public hearing, please utilize the raise your hand function in the reactions tab, or reactions menu under, at the bottom of your screen, assuming you're on a computer. Otherwise, some devices, you'll find it in the participants tab as a option. And at this time, I don't see anyone raising their hands, Mr. Chair.
We'll give them a minute. All right, nobody yet?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, doesn't appear that we'll have anybody available for the public hearing. I'll take a motion to close the hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public hearing is closed. Thank you. All right. Commission discussion and recommendation. Somebody want to take the floor? Start us off?
I'd like to.
Please do.
Thank you. This is about a proposal to incentivize developers to keep more open space and outright offer builders virtually unlimited flexibility in lot sizes, garage door sizes, etc. It basically seems like an offer to allow cramped housing so long as large amounts of land are left open. I believe this is a mistake. Basically, it is taking what I hate most about the PUD ordinance and codifying so that developers do not even need to request flexibility from lot sizes from our city council. It will be provided to developers as a matter of law as an incentive. It is taking away our city council's discretion from this, not only from this city council, but from all future city councils in weighing the benefits versus flexibility analysis under the PUD standard. Basically, as a matter of right, a developer is afforded flexibility if they preserve 25% of the land as open space. This moves things from a discretionary role of the city council to an automatic approval with no council input. There has been discussion about the PUD ordinance for a long time. I see in the staff report for this agenda item that the PUD ordinance was the #1 priority at the March 25th session. There was even the creation of a subcommittee to study this. That's my understanding. Now we are simply skipping over that #1 priority and jumping right to the #2 priority, urban conservation, when it is completely tied to the PUD standard. I do not think it's a secret that I am not a fan of the PUD ordinance, or at least I'm not a fan of how this city has implemented its ordinance, where flexibility, which is really just another word or another vehicle to disregard the city code, where flexibility is granted in exchange for so-called benefits. In my view, these benefits are not really benefits for the city and its residents at all, but rather a benefit solely for a developer's customers. In other words, these benefits, as I've seen articulated, are really things that the applicant should be doing or must do anyway. Today, this agenda item codifies the flexibility/benefit analysis, takes away discretion from our city council to make that determination, and remember, not only takes away the discretion from our current city council, but from all future city councils, and as a matter of right, allows developers to cram in as many houses as they want, so long as they keep 25% of a plat open space. Why would the council give up one of its only remaining cards? In my view, this proposal hands the flexibility to developers for this perceived benefit. There is no benefit. There will simply be open space tucked behind a swath of houses, and council will be powerless to prevent it. I understand that this proposal was requested by the city council, but I do not see this as doing anything differently than what we have done under the PUD ordinance. During tonight's training session, we were told that by right means city council has no discretion and must approve. All this seems to do is take away that analysis, discretion, and determination from our city council. Their only check and balance. I think this is a mistake, and instead, issues should be discussed on a case-by-case basis with PUD applications. Now, I don't like the PUD ordinance, but at least elected officials have some say in the matter. I vehemently oppose this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lanterman. If I may, I think one of the things they also give up in that PUD, as we saw, is that there's negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think
There is none.
with this, you could almost then say, where's the motive for either party to engage in negotiation? Because like you said, there's nothing to negotiate.
That's right. You have to approve it, and I'm going to do what I want.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have any comment, or we'll move on? Okay. Anybody else?
If I could ask a question. So we're basing this on a minimum 20-acre plot of land. Is that correct?
In order to be eligible for this type of a
Okay.
subdivision, correct.
So just for simplicity's sake, it's 4 acres by 5 acres or whatever. And I thought I heard earlier that there was the opportunity to examine each individual acre in that? Or there was something about 1 acre?
Three to five houses per acre.
Yeah, I think that's maybe, I was talking about the density, so you can't put, you need to make sure you have at least 3 units an acre in the low-density residential, not more than 5 units an acre. And is that what you were maybe hearing?
I thought it had more to do with this one passes, this one fails the examination. That it was.
So this is a standard subdivision. And this can be done by right. And I think the council said that they thought we could do better and preserve more open space using some other tools. And what could we do to get folks to do that? And we did talk about other options with the council early in the process, and ultimately felt that a subdivision like this, even though the lots were smaller, the council felt like could result in a win by preserving that open space. And so when we review it, we will still review it against all of the ordinance standards for a preliminary plat, all of the zoning ordinance standards, except that, as outlined in this, it would have different setback standards. It would have an exemption for the garage frontage percentage, and would allow, in addition to single-family homes, would allow twin homes under this type of a plat. Twin homes would be a conditional use permit in the RSF3 district under the standard zoning. So when we're reviewing it, we're still reviewing it against our standards, each one. But if a developer came in and met all of the standards in this ordinance, it's a plat. So just like the open space preservation plat, and I know you've worked on a couple of those, Commissioner, we look at the standards, are they meeting the standards? Then Planning Commission recommends approval to the council.
So we would be looking at the whole, well, there's 40 acres, or minimum 20 acres, or if it's 27 acres, we're not looking at breaking it down into individual acres and saying this passes and this fails.
Correct. I'm not sure if this is what you're getting at, but when we look at the open space, one of the things we did add in here is that if the comprehensive plan identifies the natural resource inventory map on the comprehensive plan identifies a natural feature, that must be part of the preserved area. So in that way, we are looking this or that. If they came in, for example, and said that I want to put the open space in the lower right-hand corner of this exhibit, for example, but the comp plan identifies a natural resource in the upper left, we would say, no, that doesn't meet this condition. And then you could deny the plat in that case.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Brumman?
Sure, let me formulate my thoughts, because I was coming at this from the perspective of it being without telling a landowner, meaning a developer, what they can or cannot do with their land, right, essentially. We were trying to really offer up a little bit of the preservation of the land of Corcoran as it is, offered to all residents. So I guess coming from it from that perspective, not thinking about does it tie the hands of, flexibility or whatnot, I really saw it as a positive step. I think that I did have some questions, I guess, and most of it came about, I know it's a conservation easement, so does that relieve it from property tax at both the, state and city level, or is that something that, I guess my questions were around that. Like, if it's gifted to the city through park, then I know that that's a whole different entity, but if they maintain it as an HOA and it's just a conservation easement, does that fall differently somehow in terms of property rights or property ownership, you know what I mean? Sorry if I'm not asking my...
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. It would be an outlot with a conservation easement, so it would not be tax exempt.
Yep.
Because it's unbuildable, the
Yep.
tax value is fairly low.
Okay.
The tax is not significant like it would be for a buildable lot.
Sure.
But it is still taxable land if the HOA owns it in a conservation easement.
Okay, and is an HOA eligible as an entity to apply for an exemption I mean, I know, it sounds like it wouldn't necessarily need to because the property tax would be low, but there are reserves that, native prairie is one thing that you could apply for an exemption for. And if it's a large enough space of land, I don't know, maybe that's getting into too nitty gritty, I guess. I was concerned that if an HOA owned it and had additional payments that they needed to make on it, would that just get passed on to the residents by compounding their requirement to continue to preserve that area? That was ultimately where the concern was coming from. Like, I didn't want to make it burdensome financially in any way. They're already paying HOA fees. They already have their own individual. Is this in any way making it, compounding their costs just by having a preserved, which I feel is a benefit, but I'm just looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I can't tell you the tax implications. If you know anybody who lives in Wild Meadows in Medina, you might get a sense of what that is. That is a very significant amount of open space that's
Okay.
actively maintained as wild, restored prairie, if you're familiar with that project. But the tax implications, it's my understanding, are pretty minimal. I can't
Okay.
tell you what minimal is. And I think people who would choose to live in a development like this are choosing intentionally and accept part of that as part of their HOA cost.
Okay. Thank you. And then my other question was, if it did become park, or if it was given as that park dedication, does that necessarily mean that we're not building playgrounds on all of these areas? We're just preserving it as that open space? Is that a correct assumption, or can you clarify?
We did try to keep that kind of open in there because if at the point that it becomes a public park, I don't think the city wanted to be held to keeping it as just open space, that we may want to make it more active. Whether that active just means trails or a dog park or something like that, or whether that would mean playgrounds. But it does not specifically say it needs to be maintained as purely open space if it is granted to the public.
Okay. And then just the last little piece is, I know that it was talking about preserving the natural resources that were available. And so just by way of clarification, we're calling it the open space, but that could also include like densely wooded areas. We're not just talking about, large prairie or what have you. Right. Is that correct? Okay.
Commissioner Brummond, are you still have more?
That's all I have for right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Vanden Arde? Okay. I, of course, have had some reservations, and I hold some similar opinions to Commissioner Lanterman. At the level of trying to understand why a developer inside the MUSA would want to give up land when they could just go the PUD route and then make it look like every single square foot of park or woodland preservation that they gave came at no expense to the amount of land that they could develop. Well, I don't know where this would drive anybody. During the roundtable, with the developers, I did not get any, real warm fuzzies that they thought that this was something that they would embrace. I think they'd be happy just to get 20 acres that they could develop at our current zoning, but that apparently is right now out of their reach. I do have a couple of questions on some of this. Kendra, on the 25% open space preserved, is there a scenario? There's asterisks on these lots that overlook, is that, okay, so they're overlooking that, even though they're overlooking a street from the front yard. Would that be the same benefit then as the next scenario, under 25% under the double-loaded street, where people actually do back up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, for background, we did this exhibit first, and then we're asked to do a different exhibit, or vice versa. We did the ones with the lots backed up. Which one is that? And then we're asked to do this exhibit. But yeah, the intent was, those are lots that potentially are more valuable because they're backing up or facing the open space.
And I could understand that, but that's why I had to ask. We're not really suggesting that the ones in the other, even though they'd have to look across the street from their driveway, which is less than 55 or 45% of the frontage of the house, I don't think that would be as much of a benefit to them, but I could see where somebody might try to sell it that way. But it brings up an interesting question, that if you had to back up to an open space like that, it seems to be a shame to have to put them on such small lots. Something inside me just tells me that when you have a benefit like that, you would want to put in your premier homes instead of something squished on a 45-foot base. Maybe that's just me. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the densities. So when we look at the densities, and again, we seem to be really driven, right or wrong, I don't know. I still don't get it quite in my head. But like in the straight-on example, you got 3.3 units per acre on 80-foot wide lots, right? Now, that is for simply that area, 20 acres divided by the number of lots, correct?
40.3 acres, yep. But it's again, density, I'll just back up. I think you're asking me, how do we get to the 3.3 units per acre on the standard subdivision? So density is calculated, total land area minus wetlands, wetland buffers, right-of-way, and any easement areas. For drainage and utility easements. The conservation easement does not get deducted from that. So in the standard subdivision, when we deduct the wetlands and the right-of-ways, we go from 40 acres to 23 acres, divided by 77 lots, gets us to 3.3 units an acre.
Okay, all right. And so that is why then, in all of the examples, the number that really matters is on the right-hand side of the analysis, right?
Correct.
So we got 3.4 units per acre, 3.5 units per acre, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, what would happen if Corcoran took a subdivision, it came to us, and you know what? After you did the calculations, as they should be, as they're reported, it came in at less than 3 acres, or 3 units per acre. And the planning commission recommended approval, the city council approved it. What would happen?
We have to do annual reporting to the Met Council.
Okay,
And if we are failing to meet our density goal of 3 to 5 units an acre in low density, for example, the Met Councils they're gonna scold us. We could be ineligible for grants, which we've never, we have gotten one Met Council grant, I guess. But there are some implications of us not complying with our adopted comprehensive plan. What I would tell you is if a single-family subdivision came in at 2.8 units an acre, and another one came in at 3.3, and they average out to 3, it's not going to be an issue. At the end of the day, my annual report to the Met Council needs to show that on average, we're meeting our density goals.
okay.
But if you we're starting to try to approve subdivisions and every one was 1 unit an acre, you're gonna be in trouble with the Met Council.
Okay, and that's fair, I just, you know, because again, without going in and doing things, I look around on Google Earth, I drive through neighborhoods and things like this, and I can't understand how our neighbors have been able to produce homes on 100-foot wide lots and stuff and meet this 3 to 5 units per acre. And I just like, how did they do that? I mean, if you take the development just down 116, on the left-hand side, the Medina thing, I mean, it looks like they got little houses on 100-foot wide lots. And I'm like, you know, how does that work out numerically to meet 3 to 5 units per acre? We can't get anybody to produce anything over 80-foot wide lot.
So, Mr.
And I'm not
Mayor-
understanding, are we just imposing a requirement upon ourselves that it just, maybe other communities aren't doing? And maybe that's why they get the bigger luxury, more valuable housing development than what we do. I just asking, so is there something that we're missing here? Or is it just that other communities aren't playing by the same set of rules or codes or honor system?
Okay, I was starting to answer.
Okay,
Everybody's comp plan is different. At the end of the day, every city has to have a comprehensive plan that shows that they will be at at least 3 units an acre for residential development. And so what other cities will do is they will have more high-density areas, and then their low-density residential might be 2 to 3 units an acre instead of 3 to 5. There's nothing from the Met Council that says our low-density needs to be 3 to 5. That was established as part of our 2030 comprehensive plan. I think you were involved, I wasn't, so I'm not sure all that discussion that went into that
I
one.
predate you.
I had a little sabbatical. And so we didn't have to adopt that 3 to 5.
Okay,
We could have done 2 to 4 and then had more areas in our city that were high-density housing, as long as overall we average 3 units an acre.
okay, all
So
right,
that's how a Medina, for example, theirs, I don't know what theirs is off the top of my head, but their low density might be 2 to 4
okay.
units an acre, which would make it
Okay.
easier to get those bigger lots.
I can't describe to you how nice it is to have that cleared up for me, okay? Because I've struggled with that for a really long time. Now, given that, I know, what was my other, so, and this isn't part of this discussion, but I want to throw it out there. Mayor McKee sent me an email, this proposed legislation. I don't know if you all, got it or whatnot, but it's legislation in which the state or the Met Council might require that the minimum density is 5 units per acre for everything going forward. Did I read that right?
Yep, that's been part of the discussion.
Which means that all this is for naught. Right? We could do any of this work all day long, 100 times over, but if that gets approved in 6 months, then this 3 units per acre, all of the zoning, planning stuff we got, our lowest density is gonna be 5 units per acre. And I can't tell you how much that scares me. I mean,
Call your representatives.
well, I will do so, because, as I said, that takes away, I think, a lot of what we do here and how we control development in our own community, and I think it's overbearing, but we must continue on with the business at hand. So, again, I get back to, I think this is a great initiative. I just really don't see, Based on a hypothetical, I think there's a lot of questions about the quality of the open space, and I just don't see where the benefit is to the city if we take away the ability to, because if a developer's able to get these types of lot sizes and these densities as a right, then we have no ability to negotiate on materials, setbacks, landscaping, other than what is minimum. I'd rather just see them go ahead and either they all have a park initiative. Either they have to donate land or they have to donate